We're beginning the round table now, and I'm going to be mixing things up. So my job is to keep it lively, keep the speeches short. I'm going to be asking questions. So I'm going to begin with Prof. I actually know Professor Ncube when he was the dean at WITS, University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. I see Stan smiling over there. We met him together. This was several years ago. So looking sort of a broader view from the economics angle, would you like to give us a few remarks? What are your views? This is your first time here. You've been hearing a lot from tourism ministers. And African Development Bank, as you know, they're sitting on a lot of money. They could do a lot of things. One of the things they do is infrastructure. That's one of their big projects right now. So, Prof, as a lot of us call him, any words of wisdom for us on tourism? I think there are, exactly.
It should work. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Congratulations to ATA once again for hosting the event, Africa House. Thanks very much. Well, Africa is in a bright spot right now. It's certainly at the cusp of something that could be, sustainable growth-wise, and certainly the tourism sector is a key pillar of that. We are seeing growth rates of over 7% across 10 different countries across Africa. Some of the fastest growing countries globally are in Africa, in East Africa, in West Africa. Around all over Africa. Even those that are growing slowly, they are only doing about 3%, 3.2%, which is, as you know, higher than the growth rates you see here in the US or indeed in Europe. So Africa is in a good spot, and the future does look really bright, frankly. Now, the tourism sector is a unique sector within any of the economies. Switch microphones. It's unique because it has got this strong regional integration character. The issue of Zimbabwe and Zambia is a case in point. It forces us as the African Development Bank to put certain infrastructure in place, roads in place. It benefits from that. There's an element of the tourism sector that is also consistent with what we call greening the economy, the conservation efforts around wildlife conservation. And that is all welcome in the process of economic transformation. We're also aware that the tourism sector really has a strong inclusive element, what we often call, refer to as inclusive growth, by integrating the local communities that are in those areas that are beautiful, be it the Serengeti or indeed Mount Mary, Victoria Falls. And more of that should be done. After all, these are natural assets, and it is my view, certainly the bank's view, that local communities should benefit from this. Also, tourism, the sector integrates Africa within itself in terms of intra-Africa integration, but also integrates Africa with the rest of the world. So it's a very unique sector. It is a sector that brings everything that is necessary to make an economy function. And I think the tourism ministers here are doing a great job, and certainly Africa looks bright, and tourism will play a key part of that in spearheading economic growth in Africa going forward.
Okay, so talking about tourism ministers, I would next like to ask the Honorable Fatumas Jobi-Njae her views. And she's from Gambia, and many of us who watched I don't know how many episodes it was of Roots. So the root of Roots is in her country. And they have a museum there dedicated to that. So I don't know if you want to make some remarks, comments. How should Americans be helping out? What should they be doing? Any comments on the Roots?
Thank you very much, Yao. The Gambia, we don't have mountains. All we have is the smiles. The Gambia is known as the smiling coast of Africa, and we've done a great deal in terms of tourism dating back to 1965. Those of you who had the opportunity to visit the smiling coast know exactly what I'm talking about. But just taking a cue from my brother, rather than going directly to the roots, I think we Africans have to work together. What Zimbabwe and Zambia are doing currently to host the UNWTO is a good thing. We are also trying that in the West Africa by the Gambia working with Senegal. The reason why we are not making so much noise, or should I say blowing our vuvuzela, is an issue of cost. We don't have the money. ADB, I wish he can just give us all a check, all the tourism ministers here present, to take a check home, because we need money to create the awareness. We need money to change the perception of how people perceive Africa. If one African country is in turmoil and have a problem, we all feel it, because they just say Africa. They will not even say West or Southern Africa. So I believe we Africans have to work together, and I think what my brother here wants to do is to see us all working towards marketing the African destination. In terms of airlines, we can bring down the borders, but also it's an issue of your numbers, because I think what is important to South Africa Airways is the numbers. They fly to Dakar, but we try to even have a technical stop to the Gambia, but that is not possible. Perhaps it's because we are 1.5 million of a population. But sometimes we also have to look at just starting something, and then to help us reach out to maybe the American market or the South African market. That might be something you can also consider, Greg. We've opened all the barriers. There are no barriers as far as the Gambia is concerned and aviation. Now, with regards to routes, we all know Kunta Kinte. Kunta Kinte is from the Gambia. We know Alex Haley's book, Roots. We organize the Roots Homecoming Festival every 2 years, and it is slated for next year between the 3rd to the 10th of May. JNL is here. She's been very supportive with Ogu. I've not seen Ogu around Eddie. They've been to the Gambia the last time we organized the Roots Festival, and they've seen a lot for themselves. There's a lot of a pilgrimage to where Kunta Kinte was actually kidnapped and brought to America. And there's a lot, his family members are still in the Gambia. You see the Roots book, you see the Roots movie is from the Gambia. Kunta Kinte is from the Gambia. And 2 years ago, we decided to change the name from James Island. We've now taken over the name. We called it Kunta Kinte Island because it is ours. Why should we continue to call it James Island? That will remind us of the yesterday of what they did to Kunta Kinte. So we've changed the name to Kunta Kinte Island. We're extending an invitation to all of you to come. I know air access is a problem, but you can fly South Africa Airways. If you start planning now, working with Oguso and his team, you can do South Africa Airways to Dakar. Dakar and Banjul is 25 minutes by air. There you have Arik Air flying, you have Air Senegal flying. If you can also try Brussels Airlines. Now they have a direct flight from Brussels to New York. And you can come to Dakar, and then you can find your way to the Gambia. Either by road is 4 hours, or by air is 25 minutes. But I think Africa overall is looking good in terms of tourism. We've been very resilient. The whole world is having a problem, but Africa continues to grow. We in the Gambia have seen a growth of 51% in terms of tourist arrivals. And this winter season will even be more because we have new airlines coming to the destination. But what it takes is blowing the vuvuzela. You have to make a lot of noise. You have to show the good things that you are doing. And we've seen that also in the Gambia. We're moving away from attending too many trade fairs. Because you attend the trade fairs, you give them your flyers, before they even leave, they might put it in the dustbin. What we try to do is the face-to-face interaction. We try to know who are the people, the movers and the shakers of both the airlines and the tour operators and the travel agents. Then we make appointments wherever you are. We'll come and we will meet you. We meet you, we'll invite you to visit the destination, because product knowledge is also another problem. If you don't come, you will not know, you will not feel it. In order for you to sell and represent Africa, you need to visit Africa. You come on a promotional tour. Most of the time, we split the cost. We'll give you accommodation, full board complimentary. And I must, at this point, thank the World Bank. They're helping the Gambia a lot in terms of selling the destination. They've given the Gambia $3 million. I'm not saying that, Hannah, you give the same amount. Maybe in other countries you can do 10 million. You see, ADB, they're very generous. They've given us some money, $3 million, spread over a period of 5 years. Every year we have $600,000. That is a lot of money for the Gambia. And it has helped us to reach out to even Condor. It's a German airline. They're now flying to the destination. From one flight, they increased it in 2. Last week, we welcomed Corendon, another Netherlands airline. They're also coming to the Gambia 3 times a week from October. So because of the support that we are getting from the World Bank and our all small resources, we're able to reach out. Avoid the trade fairs, do very little trade fairs, and do more of the face-to-face interaction. And of course, let us use ATA. Through ATA, we can also create the required awareness. We hosted the ATA in 2010, and they've done a lot of good to the Gambia. And Eddie, thank you very much. For now, Yao, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so since the Honorable Minister mentioned the World Bank, I can't fail to mention Hannah Mesley. Can you stand up? She used to be a faculty member. Now she moved to the other side. She now works for the World Bank. And so thank you guys for everything you do for Gambia. I should also mention that with the World Bank and Hannah's team, NYU Africa House, with the Africa Travel Association, and as I said, with the World Bank, we issue every year the State of Tourism in Africa report. I think there's some of them outside, and so please pick them up. So again, Hannah, thank you and your team. Martine, where are you? There you go. Thank you for everything you do. That's right. And maybe on that note, we should call upon the senior counselor to the UN World Tourism Organization, Sabulan Khan. We actually use a lot of WTO data in the State of Tourism in Africa report. So please, some comments on data work, what extra data we should be getting, how that can help the cause.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this very important event. And it's really a pleasure for me to represent the World Tourism Organization here with so many honorable ministers and ambassadors and policymakers from Africa and from the international community. Well, data, let me first say that we have talked about the economic success of Africa in the last few years. But if you look at the tourism sector, it has succeeded even more, despite the fact that the brand is not on the map fully, but the growth of tourism in Africa has been double the average in the world. In the past 3 years, since the 2008 crisis, the financial crisis, the continent of Africa came out of the crisis, not only economically, but in terms of tourism. 2009 was the only year when overall international arrivals dipped in the world. But in Africa, they did not. They grew, still in the 2009. And since then, the average growth has been 4.5%, whereas globally, but in Africa, it has been almost double that. So the trend is in the right direction and positive. If you look at the long term, the UNWTO long-term trends in tourism report, which is updated this year, shows that overall the tourism growth will be around 3.3% in the world. But in the developing countries, and in particular in Africa, it will be over 4.5%. If current trends continue, and if what we are talking about, the ministers and the ambassadors, the policymakers and the banks, the regional bank and the World Bank and the UNWTO working together, we can actually triple that rate easily. Because if you look at the base, it's very small. If you look at the GDP contribution of tourism to Africa, it is under $40 billion today. It can be doubled and quadrupled in the next 10 years, not in the next 25 years or 20 years. How to do it, of course, we have all talked about it. An important aspect of it is not only the establishment of brand, but the quality of the brand, which means if Africa can put in front of the international community the idea of sustainable and responsible tourism, which is inclusive, as my colleague from the Regional African Development Bank said, but also which is greening, you mentioned that, inclusive in terms of bringing the communities in, that is also very important. But at the same time, to try to see how this quality of the brand can be enhanced with working together with the Regional Development Bank, with the World Bank, with UNWTO, to implement something like what we have, a code of ethics for Africa, which was approved by the UNWTO and General Assembly, and which has also been endorsed by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And now it is recognized in the international conference, the UN Conference on Sustainable Development that took place in Rio +20, where sustainable tourism for the first time in any major international conference was recognized as a major contributor to economic growth and job creation in the developing countries. And I must say that UNWTO played a key role in that, and we are very active in Africa. We have supported consistently a lot of countries and a lot of programs are still going on. As was mentioned, the annual conference of the UNWTO will take place jointly, hosted by Zimbabwe and Zambia. And our Secretary General was there, and this signing of the Golden Books took place by the two heads of state. And I think we are on the right track, and we in the UNWTO are committed to support Africa's effort to establish its brand and its quality at the same time. Because today, if you look at quality, the tourism has become also very selective and differentiated. And if people know that the local communities will benefit, the local habitat will benefit, the local flora and fauna will benefit, and the environment will be protected, I think we will do far better. I'm addressing to the private sector here, those who are the operators and the governments, to come together and establish a code which will be seen as improving the quality of the brand that we want to establish. Thank you.
Thank you too. So now I'm going to move to Tanzania, which, as you all know, you heard from the Tanzanian delegation here. All of you, I strongly encourage you, if you're going to visit a country, those of you in the room right now, you have a very, very great opportunity. If you're going to visit Tanzania, what better than go to talk to the Minister of Tourism of the country, right? They'll open up all the places for you, okay? So Tanzania is just a wonderful place. I loved it when the tourism board there hosted us there. And I encourage you all to talk to them, okay? Wonderful country. But along those lines, Ambassador Sifui, actually, I believe your title is now changed to Chief Secretary of the President's Office. So maybe you'll tell us a little bit about that. And you are on the ground now, is that correct? And so from your vantage point, what should be done? Tanzania is a place with enormous potential. I mean, it's a big country. It has a huge history. I spend quite a bit of time now in the Middle East. NYU has a campus in Abu Dhabi. And as many of you may know, Oman. There was once a time when Oman was ruled not from the royal family in Oman, but from the royal family in Zanzibar. Okay, so they're ruling Oman from there. So it's a deep history as well, a beautiful country. So how do you get more of a contribution from tourism to Tanzania? I mean, it's already getting a lot, but we have high ambitions here, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, Ambassadors, ATA. Great to be back here in my new hat. I've been associated with the ATA for some time, when I was ambassador in Washington, when I was ambassador and permanent representative of Tanzania to the UN here in New York, and from January now as Chief Secretary of the United Republic of Tanzania. And as you heard from my colleagues from Tanzania, and as you rightly said, tourism is an extremely important economic sector for Tanzania. In terms of its contribution to GDP, in terms of foreign exchange earnings, about 25% of our foreign exchange earnings come from tourism. And in terms of exports of services, it's actually 60% of forex from export of services comes from tourism. 1 out of every 16 jobs in the formal sector is tourism related. So this is an extremely important sector for us. And we are fortunate to have quite a product mix when it comes to our tourism offerings. You mentioned Zanzibar is one place, which is, as you heard from Dr. Nzuki, we consider it a melting pot of cultures. Because if you go to Zanzibar, you really find a mixture of cultures from Africa, from Middle East, from Arab countries, from India, from Persia, from China. And as you rightly said, there was a time when the Sultanate of Oman was actually based in Zanzibar. So it's a nice place, wonderful beaches and lots of things. And the challenge which I see in a place like Zanzibar is the linkages that you need to build around tourism so that more contributes to the economy there. In Zanzibar especially, but also in the whole of Tanzania, and I believe in most African countries. The investments that you need to make sure that tourists get a comprehensive treatment, whether it's the attractions that we have, but the quality, as others have said, the quality of the accommodation, the quality of the infrastructure, transport infrastructure, the quality of human resource, the skills that our people have, the restaurants, the quality of the restaurant. So lots of investments, opportunities for investments for people in all those areas so that we get more out of what we have. The other thing that I like very much, especially taking into account the theme of this conference, is the sustainability part of it, the environment. That tourism is a sector that works in harmony with nature. If we have to continue to have the Serengeti, we have to protect it. We have to make sure that it's sustainable, that we manage it better, that the ecosystem is protected. And that contributes to other big goals like climate change and things like that. So it's extremely important also in that area. But I also like tourism in terms of the friendships and that they build across the country. I believe quite a number of investors in Tanzania actually came to Tanzania first as tourists, and they fell in love with the country. They see the opportunities. Others form NGOs. They pick a cause which they want to support, HIV/AIDS, women, environment. But most of these people came as tourists. And so when I look at tourism, I see all these things falling together. You heard here about the links with the local communities. In Tanzania, about 25% of the revenues from the wildlife management areas goes to the local community, so that they feel proud to host and to protect the resources that we have, because they now see the direct link between what they protect and their own well-being. So I'm glad to be here, and I wanted to flag those, which for us in Tanzania are extremely important. And as everybody said, everybody is welcome to Tanzania. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, and great to have you here. I'm going to move over to Ambassador Ogwin from Benin, and I think you're the only representative of Francophone Africa here, yes? And so the question to you is, I'm from Ghana, and in West Africa, sometimes when I'm teaching people about, why do you have English-speaking West Africa and French-speaking? So the joke I usually give is you look at all the rivers, so you cut a little bit around Gambia, a little bit around Lake Volta, which became Ghana. You cut a little bit around the Niger Delta, which became Nigeria. The British like water, and the French took the rest. Okay, so that's my theory about French and English-speaking Africa. But any constraints, any good things, bad things about this difference in languages? How do we get Africa as one country if we're so divided by language? What are your thoughts?
Thank you so much. Again, good morning to everyone. We consider this like a diversity and a richness and a wealth for Africa and for West Africa. So we all live together, and Gambia is there, and I'm here. We are all happy to be together with different languages. First of all, let me extend greetings from the President of the Republic of Benin, Dr. Boni Yayi, who is also the current chairman of the African Union, who unfortunately cannot be here, but asked me to come especially to extend to you his congratulations and his encouragement, and his appreciation for the great job the Africa Travel Association is doing promoting tourism into Africa and across Africa. We thank you, and we really encourage you. I also have to say special greetings to my former colleague Ambassador Ombeni Sefue and my current colleague Ambassador Maja of Tanzania. Both are very, very effective representatives of Tanzania in Washington, D.C., and I congratulate you. Thank you, Ambassador Maja, for recently organizing in Washington, D.C. such a successful event promoting tourism in your own country in Tanzania. Thank you. Well, after that, I think that the only thing I can say is tourism is very important for Africa. And all the initiatives you are taking, we can only support you. And we look forward to working with you and to promoting all this wealth throughout the continent, especially in West Africa. You heard my sister from Gambia. She spoke about West Africa and about Gambia too. And when it comes to Benin, I can also mention that tourism is considered as our second source of foreign exchange revenue. But fortunately, we still have to do a lot of work in promoting or letting people know about all the potential we have in Benin. From the south to the north, there are a lot of sites, a lot of possibilities there that we need to market. And that's where we're looking forward to cooperating with you, with your members, your agencies, and your groups to see how best we can really improve in what we are already doing in promoting those facilities. So I think I should stop there for the meantime, and thank you again. And I show that French, English, it's very good for West Africa, and we are all happy to be together. Thank you very much.
All right, okay. French, English, all good, okay. Well, let's move right on. I next move to the Chairman, Global Partnerships Forum Special Representative of the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, Amir Dosal. And again, as an economist, I use a lot of ITU data, especially on internet usage, mobile phone usage. So thank you for all that data. Please continue collecting it. But please tell us a little bit about what you do, what your thoughts are. I understand you build a lot of partnerships, especially with the UN. And I think there's something about some fundraising. You have access to a lot of money or something. So please, some words of wisdom here.
Excellency, thank you. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And thank you, Eddie, for doing this. Listening to all the comments, etc., it's quite clear that the Africa Travel Association should be renamed Africa Travel and Trade Association. I think what you're really trying to do is to bring trade and tourism to the region. So what do? We help others build public-private partnerships. It's also quite clear that, as a number of previous speakers have said, look, we need to work as one Africa. We often encourage saying, come to West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, and South African Airways is actually a very good representative for Africa, albeit mainly for South Africa, but also you do many good things for the region, especially the Southern African region. What I'd like to propose, first of all, that Africa Travel Association, or the African continent, the countries should consider appointing goodwill ambassadors from the African diaspora. For example, there are many spokespersons who live in North America, Europe, and other parts of the world who are dying to do things for Africa, who carry a wonderful voice. And I have one of them, a daughter of Ghana here, sitting here, June Sarpong, who's a media personality, who comes on TV here in the US, UK. We need people like her to be able to talk about Africa. We also want not just the diaspora, but actually appoint people from the creative community. People from Hollywood, when they talk about humanitarian issues, often you see them in the front line saying, I want to go to Sudan, I want to do this. Why do we want them to just focus on the conflict issues? Why can't we recruit them to look on the positive elements, for example? There is a lot happening which is an untold story. Last year, the United Nations held a conference for least developed countries. 43 out of the 45, quote, least developed countries are in the African continent. I think we should work from changing that LDC acronym of least developed countries to least developed countries and find a way to engage them. And I'll give you a couple of suggestions. You have some people from the US travel industry, but actually you want the media, the public relations agencies, who would be willing to do an outreach program on a pro bono basis. I think we should start with that approach. The big PR agencies, they would love to do something to promote Gambia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe. This next year's conference, what I call the Z2 factor, Zimbabwe and Zambia combining their efforts, it's a great opportunity to get some of these public relations agencies to do something concrete. On the visa issue, I think, Eddie, you should take on this responsibility. Become the kind of the facilitator for One Africa visa, for example. And perhaps working with the African Union, and through the African Union, if it comes from the presidential side, then you can start that process, and then maybe it may not happen overnight. But if you have 5 countries who say, I'll agree to one visa which will be valid for 5 countries, fine, you've already made a start. Then the other 35 countries will come running to you and saying, Eddie, can you line us up as well? I also want to mention another friend who's going out to the South Pole next year, Inge Solheim, who's a polar explorer who's here. I would expect Inge to promote Africa. He will fly into South Africa and then go to the South Pole. So I want to task you to say, can you figure out a way where you bring a group of people who can talk about Africa? If you say good things about Africa, then automatically others will say it. It's always the same thing. The grass is greener on the other side, so you can be that spokesperson. In closing, I want to say to you that we've decided to enter into a strategic partnership with the Africa Travel Association, soon to be renamed Africa Travel and Trade Association, to develop these alliances which can attract foreign direct investment to Africa. The only way you do it, you should not be thinking of charity. At the UN, we talk about aid. I often remind people that aid represents, total aid budget runs at about $110, $120 billion a year. Foreign direct investment runs at $1.2 to $1.3 trillion, as my colleague from the African Development Bank would be aware of that. And that's the kind of thing we should be focused on, attract investment opportunities. And at the conference next year, I would encourage a window which calls it Investing in Africa, a booth which is created where people just come there and see what is out there. And that's where the African Union Commission, or NEPAD, which is the New Partnership for Africa's Development, could be helpful. It could provide that window into Africa. Thank you very much indeed.
I believe there are some index cards being circulated. Is that correct, Sharon? Do we have some index cards? So people with questions, please write them down. Somebody will be collecting them. In the interest of time, I think we decided to write down the questions. So I think everybody has spoken in one capacity or the other, either up on the forum or given some remarks. So I'm going to continue quizzing everybody, but this is a time for you to write your questions and have them sent up here. So one question I'll just ask, and anybody should just feel free to jump in and answer. So I think, by the way, all of this is being televised. I believe it's going on to YouTube or something like that. Is that right, Eddie? Okay, so you'll all get an opportunity to tell your friends about this event. People on the continent watching, what we're doing right now, we'll be probably be saying, here are people who are just talking. Where's the real action? On the ground, I think a lot of big people are somewhat impatient to see something happening. We have policymakers here, decision makers, ministers. Are we moving too slowly? And if so, what can we do about it? Is there too much talking going on? Is it the case that maybe 5 years ago we're saying exactly the same thing we're saying now? Are we making progress? And none of you, you're not allowed to say, oh, it's the leader's problem, because you guys are the leaders, okay? You're not allowed to pass blame on anybody. Everybody is looking up to all of you. So does anybody want to take that on? Are we moving too slowly? Are we just talk, or are we actually making progress and there are things happening on the ground? Anybody wants to take that? I'll take this.
I think we are making progress, and phenomenal progress for that matter. To dream a few years ago that we would have a platform, an international platform, that could discuss tourism in Africa was almost unimaginable. But we have this opportunity next year in August. And we should be saying to ourselves, how do we want to position Africa at the General Assembly in terms of the agenda for African tourism going forward? We have not had an opportunity to host these General Assemblies more than twice. In fact, it was a couple of times in Egypt and once in Senegal. And we have this opportunity now in Southern Africa. And let me just be a bit arithmetical about this opportunity. We are a 186-member body in the UNWTO. And we join the UNWTO together with 16 other agencies under the auspices of the UN system, which includes ITU here. And it takes, perhaps because of the biennial eventing of the General Assemblies, 372 years for any one country to have an opportunity to host a General Assembly. And I'm saying this opportunity is shared between Zimbabwe and Zambia. It is the platform for Africa to articulate where it would like to be with global tourism going forward, its own contribution. So we are moving very, very fast, but the debate now must move towards saying, what are we going to be talking about? What are we going to tell the world? If you are a patient, you can only be assisted if the diagnosis is done properly, and if you package your issues before the doctor. And I'm saying that the opportunity is there for us to, one, in terms of brand positioning, there could never be an opportunity where Zimbabwe and Zambia are positioning themselves to marry the global bride that is called the world, represented by the 186 countries, done next year. And when you have a global wedding, you put your best foot forward, and that's what we're doing in terms of preparations. But I think there's a more substantive debate in terms of what we want to be helped on in order for us to move from the 4% perhaps to 10% by 2020. So we are moving very, very fast. I don't know, Minister, whether the sentiment is...
Yes, I think that we are moving, and generally tourism in Africa has made some advances, and clearly tourism is emerging as a very important sector in our economic development in our respective countries. But obviously there are challenges, and I think that one of the challenges which was raised by Minister Tourism from Zimbabwe is one of perception. And I think that's the one that we really have to work towards. But again, I believe that charity begins at home. And I think as much as it is important for us to want foreign tourists to come to Africa, I think there is need for Africans also to begin to travel within countries and across countries within the continent. And I think that we're not doing well in that direction. When my sister was talking about Gambia, I was saying to myself, I've never been to Gambia. And so how do we expect tourism in Africa to grow if we, the owners of Africa, do not visit each other? And I think that with all the challenges that Africa faces of transport and so on and so forth, I know that we are not fully developed in the transport sector, but whatever the transport which is available, the mode of transport, I think we should be able to use it. Whether it takes me 15 hours to get to Gambia, I should get there.
There you go. All right, so I have some, oh, would you like to respond, Madam? Okay. So I have some cards here. So I think what I'll do is I'll actually just read through a few of them, and just stop me when you want to answer one of them, okay? All right. Air access. The major problem at something is, all right. That one's gonna sit for a while until we can decipher it, okay? How does one working on the ground in Ghana with eco-sustainable tourism, a green perspective, get support to expand? Okay, so this is about green tourism. I would like to see a black celebrity or individual be the voice to promote golf and the beautiful golf courses throughout the continent of Africa. Is there an initiative that does this? Thank you. Debert Cook, publisher, African American Golfers Digest. So we got golf, we've got green. Any takers? All right, still going. What are tactical ways tourism can inform infrastructure development in Africa, since lack of adequate infrastructure is a huge hindrance to Africa's tourism sector? I got somebody there. How about the African Development Bank first? Please.
Well, I think one of our fortes as a bank is really infrastructure development. Roads, rail, ports, and electricity, and so forth. We are all acutely aware that the infrastructure gap in Africa is huge, about $45 billion a year. And a lot of this, when it is developed or dealt with, will contribute positively to the tourism sector. Now and here one is looking at both the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure, easy roads, is one thing, of course, to build 2 beautiful roads on either side of a border. But if it still takes 48 hours to cross the border, that's not a great thing. So the soft part is really the one-stop border post. I think it's fair to say, Minister Mzembe, the Chirundu one-stop border post between Zambia and Zimbabwe is working. Certainly tourists are feeling the positive impact of that. And certainly we would like to see the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa and Beitbridge also being a one-stop border post. And I'm just using examples here. Or indeed, the Namanga border post between Kenya and Zambia, and Tanzania on the way to Arusha. Now, so infrastructure is critical in moving tourists around. Another set of infrastructure is the hotels themselves, where the tourists, spend their nights and day in between visits. There's also infrastructure development around the car sector itself, and then also the airline sector. I think the issue about the South African Airways can do so much, and we thank them for. But if you look at the intra-Africa air travel, there are serious challenges. The FDB, we still have to go to Paris, come down, or Frankfurt. We're doing a lot of that, and it's still the most efficient way to travel around. But clearly, we do need a credible intra-Africa airline, something almost similar to. Do you remember Air Afrique? We need an Air Afrique to kind of come back and move people around within Africa. So infrastructure is critical for tourism. It spares tourism. It also feeds off tourism, whether it's international or local. It's a critical part of the tourism industry. Thank you.
Did you want to get that too, or?
Just to reinforce the Air Afrique concept. Yes. Before I lose the point, because I think our major challenge as tourism ministers is internal distribution of tourism traffic. International arrivals at our major international airports doesn't seem to be the challenge because we're opening up the skies. But once the tourists arrive at Harare International Airport or Lusaka, or any African capital for that matter, to get them to move internally is the challenge. And I would hope that we actually resolute around the issue of internal distribution of tourism traffic. I want to cite an example similar to the iAfrica that you have mentioned now, which is a Central African Airways that we used to have during our federation. And it would connect Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and distribute traffic internally. Perhaps from where you sit at the Africa Development Bank, you can sponsor a vision around the regional airlines and around Inter-Africa Airlines that can distribute on like a bus stop or bus service of some kind, and distribute tourists, because we can't win without internally distributing.
And we're working on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yes, oh, sorry, please.
I just want to say that I hear all the challenges. On October 18th, at the United Nations, we'll be hosting a dialogue for the CEO of NEPAD, which is New Partnership for Africa's Development, former president of Niger, with the exact same idea of bringing the private sector to the table, Wall Street investors, and people who are ready to invest in infrastructure development for Africa. You'll forgive me if I'm a bit of a cynic. We talk about problems. I'm only interested in results. We know the problems, actually we know the solutions. So the only way you do that, you do have to have a partnership between the private sector and government. Government has to say, I'm ready to open the business-friendly environment. I'm ready to provide you the opportunity to not only have a return on your capital, but guarantee you return of capital. That's the reason people don't go in. That they say, well, I don't know where I'm heading into. So what our aim is, with that process, working with the African Union Commission, working with NEPAD, bring the private sector, and they can have a direct dialogue and facilitate that new investment opportunity. Thank you.
May I add something? I think this is a discussion which is moving in the right direction in terms of action and follow-up. I would like to give you the example of the Rio Plus 20 conference that took place last June. There were heads of state and ministers and delegates and so on. But there were 50,000 people around the conference who attended, and a large number of them were from the private sector. And they were called upon to announce initiatives and commitments that their companies can make for sustainable development. And commitments of over $70 billion were announced, 400 commitments by private sector. So what I'm suggesting, my idea is that if during when you have these the United Nations World Tourism Organization conference in Zimbabwe and Zambia, that would be an excellent opportunity to organize something like what our colleague Mr. Amir Dosal said, to bring together the private sector operators from the advanced countries, from the African countries, with the policymakers and the financial institutions and expert institutions together, and say, okay, what are the concrete things that you can work on and announce at events like that, where you can see concrete progress, that moving in the right direction for investment in infrastructure, on issues of visa, on issues of greening the tourism, and inclusive tourism, job-creating tourism. So if we can combine these forces and use these forums, this conference is going to be a big one, but if we can bring the private sector on board, on the side of the conference, not as part of the conference, but in conjunction with it to do, for instance, an investment forum, where you bring all these partners together and make things happen. Thank you.
There you go.
UNWTO is already your consultant. We are already your consultants.
It's already there, but what you are talking about really is the policy content, or the policy direction of the General Assembly. And I think that's really what I was talking about, that we must sponsor an African agenda. What exactly do we want to event and just get married, or we want to event and table substantive policy issues around tourism for Africa and emerge with resolutions that can direct us going forward, say, for the next decade. So we take your point, and I hope you are able to, through your deployment here, to influence Talibrify that we discuss in Mexico when we meet next month. Yeah. The policy content of the General Assembly. What do we want to achieve with it in Africa? Because every General Assembly is unique and on the back of its host. And in Africa, we would like African issues to come out to the fore as we meet. I thank you.
All right, so I have a large number of these index cards here. So I'm going to read a few of them, and anytime you want to stop me, just stop me and say something, okay? So the one I wasn't able to read, the major problem at... so the question is about government protection of national carriers. What can tourism ministers do to help? Which I think is a fantastic question. In other words, I think, Greg, you were mentioning that it wasn't your question. You didn't ask it. But why is it that you can't travel when you come from New York, you land in Accra? Why can't you then go to Abidjan and other places freely? That's the question. Some people have to move. Okay. All right, I'm going to read through all of these. Stop me whenever you want. I think we want to work on that. You want to work on that? Okay, go ahead.
I think, I don't know who asked the question, but it's a very good one. If we do not open the skies, then tourism will not succeed. I'll give an example. There's an airline in the Gambia currently they've applied for air traffic rights. In some countries, they've applied for the past 2 months to do like a sub-regional flight. They want to also do Europe, but they need Africa to feed as a feeder, then go to the European destination. But up till today, a minister or a deputy minister is sitting on the application. The Gambia government wants that to happen, but it's the other country now that is stalling the operations of that airline. So again, it is us as government officials. You sit on the paper, and another country is saying, you have to come for us to negotiate. Why do we negotiate when you have the BASA agreement between the Gambia and those particular countries? The agreement was very clear. But certain governments, it's true, they are sitting on certain information or certain application for air traffic rights. Even to have a fifth freedom right is a problem. You see, tourism ministers are talking aviation because we're interested in aviation. So we know all the times. We are trying as tourism ministers to open the skies. We are trying to encourage our governments because we are also part of the government. You have an airline that is interested, a national carrier. Why should you protect the national carrier if the national carrier is not doing what we want them to do as tourism ministers? So it is a big problem. Some of us do it. I think in order for us to move forward, we need to stop that. There's a case in hand whereby there's an airline in a certain country. They cease operations, all their domestic flights do not operate, but that same country is not allowing another airline from the Gambia to fly to that particular destination. And in fact, the Gambia need that particular country for tourism also. Because when they come as tourists, they're different from the tour operators, whereby you sit for 3 months and then you get your money paid to your account. These people, they come, Africans come and they spend money. So immediately you have the return on that particular, the investment of taking care of the tourists. So we also as government have to make sure we move away from that. And I think as ministers of tourism, it is in our best interest to make sure we open the skies and rather than protect our national airline. So that question is very good, but I think we're doing something about it. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'm just gonna read these, and again, same thing. Stop me whenever you wanna respond. To the Tanzanian government, how is Africa in particular catering to physically disabled tourists? What opportunities are there for students to get involved with tourism initiatives in Africa? Are there any volunteer opportunities? What is being done to prepare the youth of Africa to take over tourism industry? Does the Zimbabwe government encourage volunteer tourism? Are there any organizations that offer opportunities to volunteer with the country in exchange for room and board? We have some students in here, you can tell. How do you engage the global hotel industry to build and develop properties in Africa? Mr. Khan, UNWTO. Oh, he's left. Okay, well, we'll read it anyway. Does the economic impact data that UNWTO amasses include trickle-down economies, meaning the impact of people in tourism, taxi drivers, barber shops, etc.? What do they spend in their own neighborhoods? That's the question there for Mr. Khan. Everyone is...
I am still here, so
oh, you're still here. Okay, go for it.
I was about to leave and I heard Mr. Khan, so I turned back. And I think my colleague from South African Airways also discussed with me just now the same point. I think the question is a very valid one, and the issue of multiplier effect, because tourism is not, in a strict sense, a sector like an industry, the manufacturing sector. It is a servicing sector, it's a manufacturing sector, it's a transportation sector, it's water, it's energy. All of the sectors are engaged, and it's so really intersectoral, the whole tourism industry. And the impact cuts across the economy. That is one of the beauties of tourism, that if it is properly integrated into the economic policy and planning and long-term development of the economy, then tourism can play a crucial role in developing other parts of the economy through these multiplier chain linkages effects that are very, very strong in the case of tourism. We, in fact, have done a study on the impact, economic impact of tourism on women and girls. This was done jointly with the UN Women organization at the United Nations. And this study was very well received internationally, academically, and that is available to show how tourism can uplift the condition of women, not only through incomes and jobs, but through all these elements of the interlinkages in the economy and in the society. And that is one example that I gave to my colleague, and I would refer you to that. But the organization is small. We don't have the capacity to do large-scale studies. But there is a university in the Caribbean which is undertaking academic studies of this kind, and that needs to be supported to do much more of this kind of analysis, which is extremely valuable in convincing the ministries of finance and the financial banks that this is a valid channel for investment in the broader economy. I would say that. Thank you.
Thanks to have you back. Okay, so I think I'm just going to read a few more of these. Unfortunately, I won't be able to read all of them. We're going to type them up and put them on our web pages. So I'm just going to read a few more, maybe get a last round of remarks, and then Eddie, you're going to give some closing remarks. Okay, then we go to the, lunch, okay? All right. Everyone is talking about foreign investment. Is there a way to promote local investment or other ways to finance tourism infrastructure without compromising ownership and leakage? I love Mr. Dosol's idea for these diaspora representatives to promote tourism. That's right. How about diaspora efforts to promote bilateral policy and trade between U.S. and the nations of Africa? Yes? Okay.
About 10 years ago, we set up an African diaspora network with the exact same idea that there would be linkages between U.S. business using the diaspora network. The UN has an office called the Office of the Special Advisor for Africa, and we are actually now in the process of resurrecting that kind of a concept where we engage diaspora and what we call people who are interested in investing in Africa and bring them together. And this will happen during the week of October 15th when the UN will host Africa Week at the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. Tourism as serious business and serious economic activity. For ministers of tourism, what does your Minister of Finance think about tourism as a sector for economic growth and job creation? How does your Minister of Finance support tourism compared to Ministry of Education or Transport or Agriculture?
That's a very good question. We just make them our best buddies. We should be friends. Now, on a more serious note, I think the finance ministers are beginning to realize that we are the key, or we are the engine for growth in any country. In the Gambia, for instance, we are second to agriculture when it comes to GDP contribution. We contribute 12.6, and we're expecting a growth rate of about 7.8%. And they also know that we create employment. We are very important. So if we ask for the money, unfortunately, they cannot give us all, but they see us as very good partners. They're looking for foreign currency, foreign exchange. We bring it into the countries. We contribute a lot to foreign exchange. We contribute a lot in terms of infrastructure development. Like somebody alluded to earlier on, you come in as a tourist, the next thing you are an investor. If you invest in areas as a private sector that the government cannot invest. So finance ministers are beginning to see that we in tourism are serious. But I think the onus is on us to also portray that. Even the heads of state, most of them are signing the open letters of the UNWTO. They're looking at tourism, taking it seriously. You see the case of Zimbabwe and Zambia. So it's all over. Like, I'm here, I didn't say it earlier on, but my president asked me to represent him in this forum because last year we had the vice president of the Gambia in this particular forum. So they're beginning to see us as very important in terms of economic growth and creation of employment. And most of the people we employ are young people. Thank you.
I would agree with her, absolutely, that there is a recognition, particularly by the heads of state, that tourism has to be supported. But that vision, I think, is not yet fully shared at finance minister's level. So we have to drag them kicking and screaming to understand the importance of tourism. But happily, figures do not lie. You know, when you are dealing with numbers, numbers don't lie. So they would certainly expose the fact that tourism is contributing so much by GDP, by absolute numbers in terms of revenue generation. But I think they would like that to continue without them investing a penny in making sure that it actually grows. And that's our major challenge now, to say that if you have not been funding it fiscally and it is giving you so much, what if you were just funding it 10% of what you are funding agriculture? What would it give you? And that is really the question I think that we are left with going forward. But I think at head of state level, the signing of Golden Books of Tourism is an irrevocable commitment to supporting tourism. The presence of heads of state through the speeches that we are asked to table here shows a commitment to tourism. But we have to practically walk the talk now with our treasuries to fully realize the potential.
Thank you. I think that one of the areas that we need to look at when we ask the question whether we are having support from ministers of finance, is the realization that tourism is a multi-sectorial sector that depends on other sectors. And so in the manner in which budgets are allocated, you also have to appreciate that even as a Minister of Tourism. For example, we are all agreeable that you cannot have tourism without infrastructure. Now, tourism is not an infrastructure ministry. There is a ministry responsible for infrastructure. So in the budget allocation, like for Zambia, my interest is to see that the relevant sectorial ministries that support tourism are properly funded. And for Zambia, we have a population that is mainly youthful, and most of them are out of employment. And we're looking at tourism as an important sector that is sustainable, because in Zambia, we depend heavily on mining. Now, mining as a wasting asset, we realize that there's need for diversification. And apart from agriculture, tourism is number 2 in terms of diversifying and support in terms of finance. But as I said, we look at the bigger picture by ensuring that the other sectors that support tourism are properly financed. And also, we see that tourism is very easy in terms of investments and creation of jobs, especially for the youths. And for us in Zambia, since the arts portfolio has been added to tourism, apart from the wildlife portfolio, we see the art portfolio as a subsector that needs to be developed for tourism and for job creation and, of course, for economic growth. So we see the youths as a big component in our tourism sector. And also when it comes to investments in the tourism, we see that a lot of people that have invested in tourism are normally foreigners. And our local people do not kind of appreciate tourism to the extent that they don't have too much value on the wildlife, on the Victoria Falls, as compared to the people that come from outside. So the challenge that we have is to get our local people to appreciate the natural resources that have been God-given to them and to maximize the usage for income generation activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as I said, I'm going to put all the questions on the web. We're slowly winding down now. I'm going to hand over to Eddie to begin the closing remarks. But anybody else have any last comments they want to make, things they want to say, gaps, offers of money?
I think that next year's event is a very special time for Africa. And I think that through the ATA, maybe we can work out something concrete that can bring the continent together and see how best we can maximize this rare opportunity that we have as Africa to host the General Assembly. Thank you.
I think we also have a partner in the room. CNN are also represented here, and they could be a very good partner to help to sell the conference next year in Zim and Zambia. Imran is here. He's a very good friend of ATA. You can also have a word with him to help you, because I think we need to sell it. And I think us as Africans also have to team up to help. I'm just saying that even for West Africa, we need to set up our own team to work to support this particular Congress in Zimbabwe and Zambia, because it's Africa's program. It's not just the South African continent, it is us also. So it's like all hands on deck to make sure it is a resounding success. Let us see something that they've never seen before, so that we'll have more of those in Africa. Thank you.
My sister here was asking me why I look like Professor Mtulingwe. He says, you look alike. You two look alike. Don't we look alike? Can you stand up? So maybe they don't know who you are. Yeah. So she was saying we look alike. I said, yeah, because we come from the same country. He is Zimbabwean, first and foremost, yeah. And of course, he's African by virtue of deployment now at the bank. But I would hope, and I would sincerely hope that perhaps in his deployment at the bank, he sees, he finds it in his reason and heart to place our General Assembly at the center of the PTA agenda, the bank's agenda, so that perhaps you could fund even a destination budget for marketing purposes. Because whatever investments we put in Africa, if they are shrouded around a brand that is not performing, it will not do us any good. So I am making a public appeal to my brother who looks like me, that he places at our disposal maybe something that can get our agenda working for the General Assembly.
Well, thank you very much. And
very careful.
Just one more point. There was a question earlier on about the readiness of Tanzania to cater for the disabled market. Yes, the facilities in most places, including the national parks, they are all accessible. And increasingly, the building permits are given, but the requirement, one of the requirements would be whether these facilities are accessible. So the architects have to provide for, accessible, make it accessible to the disabled. So this is one of those markets that Tanzania feels would be very significant in the near future. Not just for the disabled, but the physically challenged market would be very significant. And we welcome all, we have all those facilities, including the tourist vans. They are increasingly adapted, to be able to cater for the disabled market. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can assure you that the African Development Bank would like to be associated with the Congress. Anything we can do to make it, a success, we'll do whatever we can. I'm sure we'll be receiving some documents from you soon, some marketing bombs, some requests. Let's receive those and let's see what we can do. Let me make another point, a very different point, which is the importance of knowledge sharing. I think that there's something for a good part of Africa to learn from North Africa. When you look at Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, of course we cannot suddenly have a pyramid mushroom in Tanzania, but Kilimanjaro mountain will do for now, is a pyramid. But there's something so you can't really replicate, in a sense, the pyramids of Egypt, but there's something to learn in terms of how they go about packaging all of that tourism potential, unleashing it, huge revenues. It is what, $13 billion a year at the height of prosperity in Egypt, and it's going to come back. Tunisia doing $7 billion per annum. Those are big sums of money. So I just want to say that just the ability the need to increase the knowledge sharing within the sector is very, very important. And I hope that the Congress, in a sense, is part of doing that. Of course, it's global, but something more regional, more African will be helpful. And perhaps here again, the bank has a role to play to facilitate that knowledge sharing. Certainly going forward, we want to do more of that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And this has really been a wonderful forum. I don't think we could have dreamed of anything better than this. And I think we've had a really wonderful interactive discussion, and certainly a lot of very good ideas and some solutions were put forward. Some partnerships clearly were made. And we'd like to thank everyone for coming today. We'd like to thank the sponsors of this event, who we're very grateful. And I would like to ask everyone to give Dr. Yao Nyarko a big round of applause for not only serving as a wonderful moderator, also a great partner to ATA. This was a team effort to put this together now in our 7th year, and a lot of work goes into this. And as I recognize that, I'd like to thank the Yao's team as well as the ATA team, and from the ATA side, Sharon Rowling, Khalida Lachi, and one individual who I'd like to come up, or I know she may not like to, but I want to at least raise her hand, because this isn't easy to get everyone to come in a room like this during UN week, and that individual is Angela Geru, who is Angela, you have to raise your. So Angela works very, very hard and really behind the scenes makes all this stuff happen. So thank you, Angela. Also, and of course the rest of the ATA team and Sharon Rowling, who all these papers, being the marching orders on where to be, how to do it, it comes from Sharon. So thank you. What I would like to say is perhaps very quickly. A few little comments that I've noted down throughout the session. One is that in the introduction, we also have with us an individual who represents a very important African country and an important tourism office for that country, Mr. Aziz Gay, who's here representing the Senegal tourism. We thank you, Aziz. Also, there was just a few reflections on some comments. There was a comment or a question made about having to bring back or the importance that Air Afrique played in the tourism industry in the past. And I'd like to just kind of give another shout out to an airline that's doing an amazing job particularly with the West African market, doing what Air Afrique was doing, and that's Arik Air. And Bob Bruner's here, and I think that it's just important to talk to Bob and understand what's happening with Arik, and that's some very interesting developments. And of course, on the sponsors, we want to thank once again our most loyal and longtime sponsor for this forum, which has been two sponsors. One is South African Air, of course, Greg and the South African Air team. We thank you very much. As well as on the Tanzania side, we thank the Tanzania National Parks, we thank the Tanzania Tourism Board, and in particular, I wanted to recognize our first Vice President, Karen Hoffman, who represents Tanzania in this market, who does an amazing job and is a great friend and advocate for ATA. And of course, for the first time, we have 2 countries which have come together jointly to sponsor this event and partner, and that's of course Zambia and Zimbabwe and their tourism offices, and we're grateful for that, and I think that shows that, that there is action happening with what we talk about each year, from year to year, of countries working together. On the UNWTO event that will be taking place in October of next year, ATA will be there. We'll be there to support in whichever way that we can be helpful. And I would like to follow up on the suggestion that was made by the UNWTO today that perhaps a side event should be organized, and ATA would be very pleased to organize such an event to seek commitments from private sector and other partners. And I would like to ask Amir for his help in this, because I think you clearly have an amazing ideas, passion, and network, and we're so grateful that we were able to kind of bring you into tourism today. And you obviously are doing so many different things, and we'd love to have your support with that.
And we can also announce today that you will manage the Goodwill Ambassadors.
Yes.
From the diaspora.
Can we confirm that?
I have it on the, yes. We will, and we're seeking our first Goodwill Ambassador, and we appoint Amir Desal. Okay. So I think that's something that we have our board meeting tomorrow for ATA, and I think that should certainly go on the agenda, as well as perhaps I know that we'll have both our president and representatives from Zambia, and we hopefully we can also discuss how ATA can be helpful for that event. Would also like to just touch a base on one question that was raised. There were several questions on the student volunteerism, young professionals, youth travel. This is something that we at ATA take very seriously. I think that this is a university, of course, a lot of young people here, and I think that when it comes to how is the Africa travel scene going to be changed in the future, it's really through youth travel, volunteer travel. The generation that comes before who haven't traveled to Africa, the way that they will travel to Africa is when a young person travels and the parents come to visit, or the parents go along, or the student goes study abroad, they go on a volunteer experience. And this is what's changing the perception. And this is something that's very important. And at 2 p.m. today, the Young Professionals Program will be organizing a roundtable or a forum in room 802, in 802. So we encourage everyone to join at 802, in room 802 at 2 p.m. And this is something that we'll also take very seriously at ATA. As Yao mentioned, we're going to type up all the questions, and we'll put them up on our website, and we'll both for Africa House and ATA. And I think one of the things we can do too is perhaps take some of these questions and ask them on our Facebook page. And we can invite the Facebook followers to respond, and it could become a public forum. So these are questions that we'll take into account over the coming few months. We'll post them, and if you haven't liked or joined or whatever you do with Facebook ATA site, please do that, and then you can participate in this discussion. So on that note, I'd like to, if it's okay, Mr. Moderator, turn the floor for some closing remarks to the ATA President, the Honorable Minister of Tourism from Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much. I think mine only remains to say thank you very much for your close participation, intimate participation in this debate. I've made a decision together with my executive director here that we shall take advantage of technology. Instead of reading you the speech, we shall immediately post it on the ATA platforms and its various associated platforms, so that it receives far greater reach and distribution than it would get if I were to read it from that place there. And secondly, to say that the decision to appoint the Goodwill Ambassadors is a political decision. And the President tomorrow with his board shall certainly consider very positively. I can tell you ahead of the board meeting that we shall actively consider it and announce our first group of Goodwill Ambassadors as part of this event. Yeah. Otherwise, mine is to announce that lunch is served. I thank you.
Thank you again. Let me just make one quick announcement. We are also having the release of the African Economic Outlook with Professor Nkube. That will take place at the Africa House space, okay? That takes place at 3:30 today.